Motor pathways can also be called efferent pathways. These pathways are a series of neurons that carry information from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. Most of the neurons in these pathways are multipolar. That's the type of neuron we've been using as a standard example. The green colored neurons in these pictures are all called the upper motor neurons, or the first neurons in the pathway. They all have their cell body in the part of the brain called the primary motor cortex. Well, most of them do. The upper motor neuron leaves the brain and uses one of these pathways to descend the spinal cord. And then in the gray matter of the cord at a certain level, this upper motor neuron synapses with the cell body of a lower motor neuron, all pictured here in red. So the lower motor neurons, they then leave the spinal cord through the ventral root, through the spinal nerve, and then the ventral ramus, and finally to one of the four nerve plexuses before being routed to either a skeletal muscle, a smooth muscle, maybe a little bit of cardiac muscle, and possibly a gland. There are many ways to classify motor pathways, and one such way is to designate tracts as carrying conscious or unconscious information. It's a really broad generalization, but it can work for us at this level. The corticospinal pathway is named because of its origin in a cortex, or the outer gray matter of the brain, which is probably the primary motor cortex. These tracts are located here on the transverse section of the spinal cord. Remember, this side of the spinal cord is blue, representing the sensory pathways, and the red represent motor pathways. But the spinal cord has symmetry, so both the sensory and the motor pathways are on both sides. We're just, for brevity of a picture, putting them on one side each here. I have a picture of someone doing embroidery, which requires fine motor skills of the hands. And because this type of information is conscious information, I know that it's controlling skeletal muscle. And so therefore, the red, or the lower motor neurons, all connect to skeletal muscle at a neuromuscular junction. I also have a person here with their brachial plexus. And I want you to remember that there are four plexuses, or networks, of motor neurons: the cervical, brachial, lumbar, and sacral. So all lower motor neurons leave the spinal cord and make these plexuses, or nerve networks. Now, if one of your corticospinal tracts has been damaged above the synapse of the lower and upper motor neuron, you would see damage kind of like I have here with the scissors. And that damage would allow you to have coarse movements of the hands, but the injury would be weakness in terms of being able to produce fine movements of the hands. The tectospinal tract is very important in many sports, such as baseball. This pathway houses motor neurons that originate in an area of the brain called the midbrain. The midbrain is the superior most portion of the brain stem. This area of the brain is involved in taking visual and auditory info and producing head movements. It's kind of like how you just can't resist turning your head in the direction of a loud noise. This head turning, the reflex, is the result of the midbrain controlling your neck muscles. Your optic nerve is the only sensory nerve transmitting visual information to your brain, but there are a few cranial nerves, many, that control the muscles around the eye. So when information comes from the brain, there are many options of carrying that information. The trochlear, the oculomotor, Those are just two that can carry motor information to eye muscles. The reticulospinal tracts also have an origin in the brainstem. As you can see here, the upper motor neurons are coming from the pons and the medulla oblongata. You can also see how the motor neurons are extending to the lumbar plexus and controlling large skeletal muscles of the leg. So this pathway accounts for how motor pathways play a part in controlling your balance and posture. However, the vestibulospinal pathway also carries information, but it carries unconscious information about balance and posture. This pathway, unlike the reticulospinal, it incorporates information gathered from the vestibulocochlear cranial nerve to produce a pattern of output. So I have a little person here dancing. Because ballet, it not only requires manipulation of balance and posture, it also requires manipulation of the head. So this is the tract that allows you to continue walking forward, even though you might turn your head to one side to look at something. So it works in tandem with the previous tract. Also note that the upper motor neurons from these pathways, they originate in the medulla oblongata. And as you can see, the pathway right here, it extends almost all the way to the sacral plexus.